The Porsche was gone. The Mercedes, too. Alex stood on the clean-swept concrete of the driveway, the space where Chloe's prized Cayenne had been parked just an hour ago, now a stark, empty rectangle. The late afternoon sun cast his shadow long and thin, a stark figure of solitude against the manicured lawn of a house that no longer felt like his. He heard the muffled click of the front door and turned. Chloe stood on the porch, a vision in crisp white linen, her phone held to her ear, a triumphant smile playing on her lips. She wasn't speaking to him, she was performing for him. "Yes, Daddy, it's all settled," she said, her voice carrying with practiced clarity. "I took the cars, of course. The house is secure, he's being reasonable." The word dripped with condescension. To Chloe and her family, reasonable was a synonym for defeated. She paused, listening to the voice on the other end, her eyes scanning the property, cataloging her winnings. Her gaze fell upon the dilapidated structure at the far end of the long driveway, the detached two-car garage. A dry, dismissive laugh escaped her. "What's he getting?" "Oh, you'll love this. He gets to keep his precious workshop." She gestured vaguely with her free hand, a flick of the wrist that dismissed years of his life. "The old garage, the one with the leaky roof and the rotting door. He can have all the junk inside. It suits him, don't you think? A man with his hobbies." The final word was a scalpel intended to gut him. For 5 years of marriage, his hobbies had been a source of quiet mockery for her and her family, the Lockwoods. His love for restoration, for working with his hands, for bringing old things back to life, it was all seen as a quaint, slightly embarrassing pastime for a man who should have been clawing his way up a corporate ladder. Chloe ended her call, her smile tightening as she finally looked directly at him. "The papers are with my lawyer. You'll be served tomorrow. I trust you won't make this any more unpleasant than it needs to be." Alex said nothing. He merely watched her, his expression unreadable. Inside his pocket, his fingers found a familiar shape, a small, solid piece of metal. It was a key, old and unassuming, its edges worn smooth with time and touch. It didn't belong to the house or to any modern car. It was his anchor, his secret. "I'll have the rest of my things moved out by the end of the week," she continued, her tone brisk, businesslike. "Don't touch anything in the house. My father has already inventoried it." He gave a slow, deliberate nod. This seemed to satisfy her. He was playing the part she had cast for him, the diminished man, the quiet failure. She turned, her white linen dress catching the breeze, and walked to a waiting Uber at the curb without a backward glance. As the car pulled away, Alex was left alone in the silence, the ghost of her perfume and the phantom weight of her contempt hanging in the air. He looked from the empty spaces in the driveway to the old garage. From the outside, it was exactly as Chloe had described it. The gray paint was peeling, the wood around the window frames was soft with rot, and one of an old pair of heavy wooden doors sagged on its hinges. To the Lockwoods, it was a symbol of his stagnation, a derelict shed for a man with no ambition. They thought they knew everything about him, had measured his worth and found it wanting. They were wrong. Within 24 hours, their carefully constructed world of status and assumption would begin to fracture. Within a week, it would shatter. And it would all start with the junk in that wrecked garage. Because Chloe had taken the cars, but she had left him the car. She had left him the one thing that was worth more than the house, the Porsche, the Mercedes, and her father's entire stock portfolio combined. She had left him the Shelby. And she had no idea. If you've ever felt underestimated, if you've ever had your worth judged by people who can only see the surface, then you're going to want to see how this plays out. It's a story about the difference between perceived value and true worth. We love hearing from you, so drop a comment and let us know where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's go back and see how it all began. The humiliation had been a slow, steady erosion, like water dripping on stone. It rarely came in a torrent, but rather in 1,000 small, cutting remarks, each one designed to chip away at his confidence and reinforce his status as the outsider. The first truly memorable instance, the one that had set the tone for the entire marriage, had been a Sunday dinner at the Lockwood estate 6 months after the wedding. The estate was less a home and more a declaration of dominance over nature and the local tax code. A sprawling Neo-Georgian monolith of pale stone and dark slate, it sat on 50 acres of unnaturally green lawn. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of beeswax and money. Richard Lockwood, Chloe's father, held court from the head of a mahogany table that could have comfortably seated 20. He was a man built of soft living and hard opinions, his face perpetually flushed with the conviction of his own importance. "So, Alex," Richard had begun, carving into a crown roast with surgical imprecision, "Chloe tells me your little firm landed the community library project." He made community library sound like a public restroom. "Good for you. Keeping busy." Across the table, Chloe's mother Eleanor gave a tight, bloodless smile. She was a woman who seemed to be held together by tension and pearls. "It must be so rewarding," she'd said, her tone suggesting the exact opposite, "to work on those civic projects, so charitable." Alex had felt Chloe's foot tap his under the table, a familiar signal to just smile and let it go. "It's a great project," he'd answered calmly, meeting Richard's gaze. "It's a chance to create a central hub for the town, a place for learning and connection. The design challenges are fascinating." Richard chuckled, a low, rumbling sound from deep in his chest. He was a hedge fund manager, a man who dealt in the abstract and brutal world of numbers. To him, anything that couldn't be quantified in quarterly earnings was a hobby. "Design challenges, right." He gestured with the carving knife. "I move $100 million before breakfast, shift global markets with a single phone call. That, my boy, is a challenge. Building a room for some books, that's arts and crafts." Chloe's younger brother Julian had snickered into his napkin. Julian was a carbon copy of his father, but without the veneer of success to justify the arrogance. He was perpetually between ventures, each one more ill-conceived and expensive than the last. "Dad's right," Julian chimed in. "I don't get why you bother with all the brick and mortar stuff, Alex. It's so analog. The real money, the real power, it's all digital now. It's fluid." "Your last fluid venture was an app for rating different kinds of artisanal toast, Julian," Alex had replied, his voice even. "I believe it was called Toaster." The table went silent. Julian's face flushed a blotchy red. Eleanor's lips thinned into a razor line. Richard placed the carving knife down with a heavy thud. It was Chloe who broke the tension, laughing a little too loudly. "Oh, Alex, don't be silly," she'd said, her eyes flashing a warning. "Julian's app was ahead of its time. You architects just have such a linear way of thinking." She was defending them. She was managing him. In that moment, Alex understood his role in the family ecosystem. He was the court jester they didn't know they'd hired, the designated commoner whose simple life served to make their own feel more grand, more important. He was the before picture to their after. He had reached into his pocket then, his fingers closing around the cold, familiar metal of the Shelby key. It was a habit he'd developed, a silent act of rebellion. While they debated the merits of his chosen profession, he held in his hand a tangible piece of history, a symbol of engineering purity and raw power that they could never comprehend. They saw a man in a moderately priced suit who designed libraries. They had no idea he was the custodian of a legend. "You're right," Alex had said, withdrawing his hand from his pocket and picking up his wine glass. He looked at Richard. "It's a completely different world. I can't imagine the pressure." It was the perfect thing to say. It was an admission of his lesser status, a deference to Richard's perceived superiority. The tension in the room dissipated. Richard beamed, his magnanimity restored. "That's the boy," he'd boomed. "He knows his place. Have some more wine, Alex, the good stuff. As the butler refilled his glass, Alex had glanced at Chloe. She was smiling at him, a look of pure relief on her face. She thought he had learned his lesson. He had. He had learned that for these people, reality was a matter of perception, and they were determined to dictate that perception. He had also learned that his quiet, unassuming life was the perfect camouflage. They would never look for power in a place they had already labeled as weak, and that, he realized, was the ultimate strategic advantage. The dinner had continued, the conversation flowing around him, a river of self-congratulation and casual cruelty. And Alex had sat there, smiling politely, the secret in his pocket feeling heavier and more powerful than ever before. The charity gala 6 months later was the Lockwood's natural habitat. It was a glittering, suffocating affair held in the grand ballroom of a downtown hotel. A sea of black ties, sequin gowns, and bared teeth masquerading as smiles. Chloe was radiant, moving through the crowd with the easy grace of a predator. She collected compliments and gossip like a bee gathering pollen, leaving a trail of air kisses and murmured intimacies in her wake. Alex, as usual, trailed a few paces behind, a handsome but ultimately forgettable accessory to her social brilliance. He was standing near a marble column, nursing a glass of champagne he didn't want, when Julian found him. Julian's eyes were bright with a manic, unearned confidence that Alex had come to associate with a new, disastrous business idea. "Alex, my man," Julian said, clapping him on the shoulder a little too hard. "Just the guy I wanted to see." "Julian," Alex acknowledged, his voice neutral. "Enjoying the party?" "Networking, my friend, networking. You should try it sometime," Julian said, oblivious to the insult. "Listen, I've got something huge on the boil, game-changing, and I thought of you." Alex braced himself. Julian's last game-changer had involved importing single-origin volcanic sand for boutique children's sandboxes. It had ended with 2 shipping containers of unsellable black grit impounded at the port. "It's a paradigm shift in the luxury wellness space," Julian began, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "We're talking about bio-integrated living environments. Smart homes are old news, Alex. We're creating sentient homes." Alex blinked. "Sentient homes?" "Well, not actually sentient, obviously. The tech's not there yet. It's a branding thing. Think AI-driven atmospheric management. The house learns your moods. You walk in stressed, the lights dim, the air is infused with lavender, a little Vivaldi starts playing. It's proactive wellness architecture." It sounded like a glorified smart thermostat with an essential oil diffuser. "That's ambitious, Julian." "Exactly, and that's where you come in," Julian said, leaning closer. "I need an architect on the advisory board. Someone with credibility, but, not so high profile they'll want a huge slice of the pie." The backhanded compliment was delivered with a cheerful grin. "You'd be perfect. It's mostly just putting your name on the letterhead, and of course a small seed investment would really show your commitment." There it was, the pivot from pitch to plea. "How small?" Alex asked, already knowing the answer would be anything but. "A token of faith, say 250,000, just to get the prototype built. You'll make it back 100 times over in the first year, I guarantee it." Alex kept his face impassive. He knew Julian's finances better than Julian did, thanks to a few tearful confessions from Chloe over the years. The young man was a black hole of debt, propped up only by his father's grudging handouts. Giving him $250,000 would be like throwing it into a furnace. "I'll have to think about it, Julian," Alex said carefully. "I'd need to see a full business plan, the financials." Julian's face fell, the manic energy deflating into petulance. "See, this is your problem, Alex. You overthink things. You're too cautious. Some opportunities you just have to jump on." He sighed dramatically. "Fine, think about it, But don't take too long. The train's leaving the station. Julian stalked off toward the bar, and Alex felt a familiar mix of pity and exasperation. A few minutes later, he saw Julian in animated conversation with Chloe. He watched as his brother-in-law gestured wildly, his expression one of wounded pride. Chloe listened, her brow furrowed with concern, occasionally glancing over at Alex. The narrative was being written, and he was once again the villain. It didn't take long for her to find him. She cornered him by the silent auction tables, her smile gone, replaced by a mask of cold fury. "What did you say to him?" she hissed, keeping her voice low but venomous. "He pitched me an idea for sentient houses and asked for $250,000, Alex said simply. "And you said no." It wasn't a question. "I said I'd think about it," which to my brother is the same as saying no. Alex, do you have any idea how embarrassing that is for me? He comes to you, his own brother-in-law, with an incredible opportunity, and you treat him like a child. Chloe, the idea was terrible. He has no business plan, no prototype, nothing but buzzwords. It's a fantasy. Her eyes narrowed. It's a dream. It's ambition. Something you wouldn't understand. You're so content in your little world, designing your little buildings, hiding in your dusty garage. God, sometimes I think my father is right about you. The words hung in the air between them, uglier than any of the modern art being auctioned off. "And what is it your father says about me?" Alex asked, his voice dangerously quiet. Chloe had the grace to look away, a faint blush rising on her cheeks. "It doesn't matter," she muttered. "The point is you could have been supportive. For me, you could have just encouraged him." "Encouraging him would mean lying to him and throwing good money after bad," Alex said. "Is that what you wanted? For me to fund another one of his failures?" "It's not about the money," she whisper-shouted, her frustration boiling over. "It's about family. It's about showing a united front. But you can't do that, can you? You always have to be so principled, so detached." She looked at him with genuine contempt. "You just don't get it. You never will." She turned on her heel and disappeared back into the crowd, leaving Alex standing alone by a table of donated spa packages. He reached into his pocket. The key was there, solid, real. He thought about Julian's sentient house idea, this desperate attempt to create an environment that responded to human needs. Then he thought about his garage, a simple, non-sentient space, a building of wood and concrete, yet it understood him better than his own wife did. It was a place of honest work, of tangible results. It was a place of quiet integrity, and hidden within it was a machine born of that same integrity, a masterpiece of form and function. He looked across the ballroom at the Lockwoods, Richard laughing loudly, Julian sulking at the bar, Chloe now smiling brightly at some banking tycoon. They were a family built on a foundation of shifting sand, of image and illusion, and they were trying to pull him down into it with them. That night, holding the key in his pocket, Alex made a decision. He would not be pulled down. He would not be eroded. The next time the water came, he would not be stone. He would be the dam. The argument at the gala was the first tremor of the earthquake to come. In the weeks that followed, the fault lines in their marriage became impossible to ignore. The house, once a shared space, became a landscape of hostile territories and silent ceasefires. Arguments erupted over trivial things, a misplaced bill, the temperature on the thermostat, but they were never about the things themselves. They were about ambition, about values, about two people looking at the same world and seeing entirely different things. "We could be a power couple," Chloe said one evening, standing in the doorway of his home office. She was dressed for a dinner he had declined to attend, a fundraising committee for one of her mother's charities. "We could be on every list, in every society column, but you're content playing with your little blueprints and hiding in that filthy garage." Alex didn't look up from the schematic he was reviewing. It was for a pro bono project, a new wing for a children's hospital. These little blueprints are going to give sick kids a better place to heal, Chloe. Oh, please, she scoffed. Don't you get tired of being so noble? Nobility doesn't pay the mortgage on a house in this neighborhood. I pay the mortgage, Chloe, he said, his voice level. I've paid it every month, on time, since we moved in, along with the utilities, the taxes, and the membership at your country club. This was a tactical error. The truth, when it came to finances, was a weapon Chloe could not abide being used against her. Her face hardened. My father co-signed for the loan. We wouldn't even be in this house if it wasn't for him. You seem to forget that. He hadn't forgotten. He had never understood it. At the time, his own credit and financials were more than sufficient. But Richard had insisted, calling it a simple family formality to grease the wheels. Alex now saw it for what it was. A leash, a way to keep him tethered to their world, forever in their debt. You're right, he said, finally looking up at her. How could I forget? The sarcasm was lost on her. Exactly, you should be grateful. Instead, you're unsupportive, you're unambitious, and frankly, Alex, you're boring. The word landed with the heavy thud of a closing door. After she left, the silence in the house was immense. Alex sat in his chair for a long time, the blueprints for the hospital wing forgotten on his desk. He thought about the word unambitious. His firm, which he had started from scratch with 2 other partners, now employed 15 people. They were selective about their projects, choosing quality over quantity, meaning over margin. They had won national awards, but he never brought the trophies home. They were in a display case at the office. He hadn't wanted to seem like he was showing off. He finally stood up and walked to the window, looking out toward the dark shape of the garage. For 5 years, he had tried to fit into Chloe's world. He had worn the right clothes, gone to the right parties, and swallowed the right insults. He had diminished himself, made himself smaller, in the hope that it would make her happy, make her family accept him. He realized now that it was a fool's errand. They didn't want him to succeed. They wanted him to fail in a way that validated their own superiority. The next morning, he made a phone call. Marcus Thorne, a warm, familiar voice answered on the second ring. Marcus, it's Alex. Alex, to what do I owe the pleasure? Don't tell me you're finally ready to sell that old Ford and buy a sensible index fund. Marcus Thorne was more than Alex's lawyer and wealth manager. He was his oldest friend. They had been roommates in college, 2 scholarship kids navigating a world of legacy admissions and trust funds. Marcus had gone into law and finance, Alex into architecture, but they had remained close, bonded by a shared, pragmatic worldview. Marcus was the only person in the world, besides Alex himself, who knew the full, unvarnished truth of Alex's financial situation. Something like that, Alex said, a wry smile touching his lips for the first time in weeks. Listen, are you free for a meeting this week? I need to make some changes, restructure a few things. There was a pause on the other end. Marcus, a man who could read financial reports like novels, could also read the unspoken subtext in a friend's voice. How big are the changes we're talking about, Alex? On a scale of rebalancing a portfolio to scorched earth. Alex looked around the silent, pristine home office. He saw Chloe's influence everywhere. The silk curtains, the abstract art that was more investment than expression, the faint scent of her expensive perfume. It was a beautiful prison. Let's start with scorched earth, Alex said, and see where we land. The meeting took place 2 days later in Marcus's discreet, minimalist office on the 40th floor of a downtown skyscraper. The view was breathtaking, a panoramic vista of the city Alex had helped to build. 1 library, 1 hospital wing, 1 carefully designed public space at a time. Marcus had a file open on his large glass desk. It wasn't a paper file. It was a secure, encrypted digital portfolio projected onto the glass. The numbers and charts glowed with a cool blue light. All right, Marcus said, swiveling in his chair. Let's review. The Alex Mason Humble Architect Fund is performing as usual, exceptionally well. He grinned. The name was a joke between them. 10 years ago, Alex's firm had been hired to design the international headquarters for a then unknown tech startup. The startup had been short on cash, so Alex, believing in the founder's vision, had accepted a significant portion of his firm's fee in stock options. That startup, Innovate Dynamics, was now a global tech behemoth, and Alex's modest fee had blossomed into a fortune that dwarfed the Lockwoods' entire net worth several times over. He had quietly diversified, managed by Marcus, into a vast and complex portfolio that was almost entirely liquid and held under a series of trusts and holding companies that were legally invisible to the outside world. The Lockwood family's estimated net worth, based on public filings in Richard's fund performance, is around $30 million, give or take, Marcus said, tapping at the screen. Most of it tied up in property and their own fund, which, by the way, has been underperforming the market for 3 straight quarters. You, on the other hand, he swiped and a new number appeared, large and undeniable. It had 9 zeros after the first 2 digits. Alex looked at the number without emotion. It was an abstraction, a tool. It had never been the goal. The house, Alex said. She thinks her father's co-signature gives them leverage. Marcus laughed. Oh, that's adorable. I remember that. Richard insisted. I looked into it. He co-signed, yes, but you are the sole name on the title, and every single mortgage payment, plus the initial 20% down payment, came from this account here. He pointed to a line item labeled AM Primary Disbursement, which is funded by a trust established 5 years before you even met Chloe. His signature is legally meaningless. He's a guarantor, not an owner. If you defaulted, the bank would go after him. But you haven't defaulted. You've prepaid. In fact, you've paid enough into escrow to cover the next 3 years of payments. Alex nodded slowly. The cars. The Porsche and the Mercedes are both leased. The leases are in both your names, but the monthly payments are auto-drafted from your joint checking account. An account which I fund exclusively, Alex stated. Correct, Marcus confirmed. An account which, I notice, has had significant withdrawals made to Chloe's personal savings and to a J. Lockwood over the past year. Julian, Alex said, his jaw tightening. I figured. So the cars are awash. She takes them, she takes over the payments. The leasing company won't care as long as the check's clear. They continued down the list, methodically dissecting the life Alex had built with Chloe. The art, the furniture, the joint accounts. For every asset Chloe believed was hers, Marcus had a clear, documented paper trail proving Alex's sole, premarital, or separate ownership. He had structured his life with the same meticulous detail he used to design his buildings. Not out of distrust, initially, but out of a deep-seated need for order and clarity. Now that meticulousness was about to become his salvation. Which brings us, Marcus said, leaning back, to the garage. She can have it, Alex said, a ghost of a smile on his face. You mean she can have the structure, Marcus clarified, a twinkle in his eye, the contents of which are listed under Personal Property, Schedule C, and include one, let me see here. He zoomed in on a line of text. 1965 Shelby GT350R, chassis number SFM 5R531. Premarital asset, fully restored, current appraised value. He whistled softly. Damn, Alex, it went up again. It's a bull market for honesty, Alex said, looking out the window at the sprawling city. All right, Marcus said, all business now. Here's the plan. You do nothing. You say nothing. You let her and her father think they have all the cards. You let them serve you the papers. You let them make their demands. You play the part of the beaten man. The more confident they are, the harder they'll fall. And when do we respond? Alex asked. Marcus smiled, a slow, predatory grin that was utterly unlike his usual warm expression. It was the smile that had made him one of the most feared divorce attorneys in the state before he transitioned to wealth management. "We respond," he said, "in a time and place of our choosing, and we will respond with the simple, unassailable, and utterly devastating truth." The call from Chloe came a week later. Alex was in the garage, a place he now felt he was reclaiming. The air was thick with the scent of old oil, aged wood, and something else, the faint, metallic tang of potential. He had a hand resting on the dusty canvas tarp that covered the majority of the garage's floor space, a silent communion with the beast that slept beneath. His phone buzzed, and he saw her name flash on the screen. He let it go to voicemail, then played the message. "Alex, it's me." Her voice was strained, the usual breezy confidence replaced with a brittle edge. I just wanted to let you know that I'm moving my things out today. The movers will be there at 2. I'd appreciate it if you'd make yourself scarce. Let's not make this any more awkward than it has to be." A pause. "And the papers were filed. My lawyer said you should have them by now. I hope you'll just sign them and we can both move on. It's a very generous offer, Alex. More than you deserve, frankly." Click. More than he deserved. He looked around the garage. Every tool, every workbench, every can of solvent was his. He had built this sanctuary with his own hands. Under the tarp was a machine he had poured thousands of hours into, a project of pure passion. He thought of the house, filled with furniture she had picked, art her mother had approved of, a life curated to project an image that was not his. The movers came at 2, a team of burly men who moved with practiced indifference. Alex watched from the garage, unseen, as they carried out Chloe's life in a series of cardboard boxes and furniture blankets. The expensive Italian sofa, the crystal lamps, the walk-in closet's worth of designer clothes. He felt nothing. It was like watching strangers empty a hotel room. Finally, Chloe herself arrived, not in an Uber, but in the gleaming Porsche Cayenne. She was there to supervise, to direct, to make sure she didn't leave a single one of her entitlements behind. She walked through the now empty rooms, her heels clicking on the hardwood floors, an empress surveying a conquered territory. She saw him then, standing in the open doorway of the garage. She hesitated for a moment, then strode across the lawn, her face a mask of impatient resolve. "I thought I asked you to leave," she said, stopping a safe 10 feet away. "This is my property, Chloe," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "I'm not going anywhere." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Don't start, Alex, just don't. Let's not pretend you're going to put up a fight. It's not in your nature." She glanced past him into the dim interior of the garage. "What are you even doing in this dump?" "Thinking," he said. She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. "Don't hurt yourself. Look, my lawyer is going to call your lawyer, assuming you even have one, and finalize everything. I am taking the house, the accounts we shared, and the art. The cars are already handled. You get your tools, your clothes, and this." She gestured at the garage again, the same dismissive flick of the wrist she'd used on the phone with her father. "You can keep your dusty old garage. It suits you." It was the second time she had said it. The first time it had been an insult. Now hearing it again, it sounded like a blessing. "Is that your final offer?" he asked, a strange sense of calm settling over him. She looked at him, confused by his tone. She had expected pleading, or anger, or at the very least, sadness. This calm acceptance was unnerving. "It's not an offer, Alex. It's a fact. It's what's happening. My father has made sure of it." "Your father," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Of course." "Yes, of course," she snapped. "Someone has to be the adult here. Someone has to be ambitious. You had your chance to be part of this family, to rise with us, but you preferred this." She wrinkled her nose at the smell of grease and turpentine. "So you can have it. Wallow in it. Goodbye, Alex." She turned and walked away, not waiting for a reply. She got into the Porsche, the engine roaring to life with an obnoxious snarl, and peeled out of the driveway, leaving a faint black mark on the concrete where the Mercedes used to be. Alex stood there until the sound of the engine faded completely. The movers were gone. The house was empty. The only sounds were the chirping of crickets and the whisper of the wind in the oak trees. He was alone. But for the first time in a very long time, he did not feel lonely. He felt free. He turned and walked back into the garage. He didn't turn on the harsh, overhead fluorescent lights. Instead, he flicked a switch that illuminated a series of low-slung track lights, the kind he used for detailed work. The light pooled softly on the great canvas tarp. He walked to the corner of it, took a deep breath, and began to pull. The canvas was heavy, stiff with dust, but it moved, revealing first a curve of metal, then a sliver of glass, then a wheel. He pulled harder, and the tarp slid away, rustling to the floor like a shed skin. And there it was. It sat in the center of the garage like a jewel in a dusty box. It was not a car. It was a statement. A 1965 Shelby GT 350R, painted in Wimbledon white with guardsman blue stripes. It wasn't pristine in the modern sense. It was perfect in the historical sense. Small rock chips peppered the front valance, testament to a life lived on the track. The massive riveted plexiglass rear window was slightly hazed with age. The side exit exhaust pipes were stained with the heat of 1,000 explosions. This was not a replica. This was chassis number SFM5 R531, one of only 34 ever built by Carroll Shelby for the express purpose of dominating SCCA racing. This car had history baked into its metal, its soul forged in the heat of competition at Riverside, at Sebring, at Daytona. Alex had found it 15 years ago, a forgotten, half-dismantled wreck in a barn in rural Texas. He had bought it for a song from a farmer who thought it was just some old Mustang. The restoration had been his life's secret passion. He had spent years researching, sourcing original parts from all over the world, painstakingly bringing it back not to showroom condition, but to race-ready authenticity. It was his cathedral, his masterpiece. He ran a hand along the fender, the cool, smooth paint of familiar comfort. Chloe and her family saw status in newness, in brand names, in the price tag. They could never understand this. They could never understand that some things, the most valuable things, had a worth that couldn't be leased or financed. It had to be earned. It had to be understood. He walked to the driver's side door, pulled the small, unassuming key from his pocket, and inserted it into the lock. The click of the mechanism was crisp and satisfying. He opened the door and slid into the simple, brutal bucket seat. The cockpit was an exercise in pure function. A wall of Stewart Warner gauges, a simple wooden steering wheel, and a 4-speed shifter rising from the transmission tunnel. It smelled of gasoline, leather, and victory. He sat there for a long time as the evening light faded outside. Chloe had taken what she thought was valuable. She had left him with what she thought was worthless. In her arrogant blindness, she had performed the most lopsided trade in history. She had taken the liabilities and left him with the single greatest asset. The game wasn't over. The game had just begun. And for the first time, he was going to play. The meeting was set for a Tuesday, 2 weeks later. The venue was the conference room of Chloe's lawyer, a man named Arthur Vance, whose firm occupied a floor in a building that tried to project the same aura of old money as the Lockwood estate, but with more glass and less soul. Alex had spent the intervening 2 weeks in quiet preparation. He had followed Marcus's advice perfectly. He hadn't answered Chloe's increasingly frantic texts. He had ignored the single, pathetic voicemail from Julian asking if he'd reconsidered the sentient house investment. He had let the silence build, letting their confidence curdle into a low-grade anxiety. The morning of the meeting, Alex chose his clothes with the care of an actor selecting a costume. He didn't wear a power suit, that was their language. He chose a simple, well-made pair of dark gray trousers, a crisp white shirt with no tie, and a soft, unstructured navy blazer. He looked like what he was, an architect, a man who builds things. He was clean, simple, and structurally sound. He drove to the meeting not in the Shelby, of course, that would be revealing his hand too soon, but in a modest, late-model sedan he had purchased with cash the week before. As he parked, he saw the Porsche Cayenne in a reserved spot near the entrance. He smiled. Marcus was waiting for him in the lobby, holding two leather-bound portfolios. He was dressed in a razor-sharp charcoal suit, the picture of calm, lethal competence. "Ready?" Marcus asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I've been ready for 5 years," Alex replied. They rode the elevator in silence. When the doors opened, they stepped into a reception area of hushed tones and expensive carpets. A severe-looking receptionist directed them to the main conference room. The room was designed to intimidate. A massive dark wood table dominated the space, surrounded by imposing leather chairs. One entire wall was a window, offering a commanding view of the city, and on the far side of the table, the opposition was assembled. Chloe sat in the center, flanked by her father Richard and her lawyer, Arthur Vance. Vance was a portly man with a florid face and a suit that was too tight in the shoulders. Richard looked smug and impatient, checking his gold watch as if their time was a precious commodity being wasted. Chloe herself looked pale but determined. She wore a severe, dark gray dress, her business armor. She refused to meet Alex's eyes. "Gentlemen," Vance began, his voice a self-important boom, "thank you for coming. I'm sure we all want to resolve this matter as quickly and painlessly as possible." He slid a thin folder across the polished table. "This is our proposed settlement agreement. I think you'll find it more than generous under the circumstances." Marcus didn't touch the folder. He simply placed his two, much thicker portfolios on the table in front of him, with a soft, definitive thud. "Mr. Vance," he said, his voice calm and measured, "we will not be needing that." A flicker of annoyance crossed Vance's face. "I'm sorry?" "We are rejecting your offer," Marcus stated plainly, "in its entirety." Richard snorted. "Don't be a fool, son. This is the only deal you're going to get. Take it and be grateful." Alex leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. It was the first time he had spoken. "Grateful? That's an interesting choice of words, Richard." He looked directly at his father-in-law, his gaze steady and unblinking. "Let's talk about what I have to be grateful for." The atmosphere in the room shifted. The smug confidence began to leak away, replaced by a tense curiosity. "I'm grateful," Alex began, his voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room, "for the family dinner on June 12th of last year. The one where you, Richard, referred to my life's work, the firm I built from the ground up, as a respectable hobby. And you, Eleanor," he said, though she wasn't present, her influence was palpable. "Ask Chloe if my clients ever actually paid on time. It was a valuable lesson in how you perceive work that doesn't involve moving imaginary numbers around a screen." Richard's face began to flush. Chloe shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "I'm also grateful," Alex continued, his eyes moving to Chloe, "for the Children's Hospital Charity Gala on December 8th. The night you told me that I was unambitious, boring, and that you thought your father was right about me, all because I declined to invest $250,000 in Julian's app for artisanal toast. Oh, my apologies, that was the previous venture. This one was for sentient houses. My mistake." Chloe flinched as if struck. Vance looked from Alex to his clients, a frown of confusion on his face. This was not on the script. "And I am profoundly grateful for our last conversation, Chloe. The one where you stood in our driveway and so generously bequeathed to me the wrecked garage and all the junk inside. You said it suited me, and you were right, it does." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. He was not angry. He was not shouting. He was simply stating facts, holding up a mirror to their own behavior. It was more effective than any outburst could ever be. "You have all operated under a series of assumptions," Alex said, his tone shifting from recollection to presentation. "An assumption about my career, an assumption about my finances, an assumption about my nature. Today we are going to correct those assumptions. With facts." He nodded to Marcus. Marcus opened the first portfolio. He didn't slide it across the table. He stood up, walked around the table, and placed it directly in front of Arthur Vance. "Mr. Vance," Marcus said, "this is a comprehensive financial disclosure for my client, Mr. Alex Mason. It includes his net worth, asset allocation, and income streams, all verified and notarized. I draw your attention to page 1, the summary." Vance, looking flustered, opened the portfolio. His eyes scanned the first page. His jaw went slack. He read it again, his finger tracing the lines as if he couldn't believe what he was seeing. He looked up at Alex, then at Marcus, his professional composure completely gone. He was pale. This is impossible," Vance stammered. "This must be some kind of fraud." Richard, his curiosity now piqued by Vance's reaction, snatched the portfolio from his lawyer's hands. He stared at the page. The deep, ruddy color drained from his face, leaving behind a pasty, grayish pallor. He looked like he had been punched in the gut. "What is it, Daddy?" Chloe asked, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. Richard didn't answer. He just kept staring at the number on the page, a number so large it seemed to defy the reality he had constructed for himself, a reality in which he was the wealthiest man in any room he occupied. "He's worth more than we are," Richard finally croaked, the words sounding like a confession. "A lot more." Chloe's head snapped toward Alex. For the first time she looked at him, really looked at him, and in her eyes he saw not love or remorse, but the dawning, horrified realization of a monumental miscalculation. "How?" she whispered, the single word encompassing a universe of disbelief. "It's all in there," Alex said calmly. "The tech firm I did the design for 10 years ago, the one I told you about, the one you said sounded nerdy. The stock options I took as payment, the trusts I established before we ever met, the investments Marcus has been managing for me. It's not new money, Chloe, it's just quiet money." The silence in the room was absolute, broken only by the sound of Richard's labored breathing. Arthur Vance was frantically flipping through the pages of the portfolio, his expression growing more desperate with every turn. He was a man watching his entire case, and a significant portion of his fee evaporate before his eyes. "So," Marcus said, breaking the silence as he returned to his seat, "as you can see, the financial disparity here is significant. The premise of your entire claim, that Ms. Lockwood is leaving a financially dependent spouse and is thus entitled to the lion's share of the marital assets, is not only false, it is demonstrably absurd." Richard finally found his voice, a weak, sputtering rage. "This is a trick, a deception. You lived in my daughter's house. A house for which I made every single payment from a premarital trust account," Alex cut in, his voice like ice. "A fact which is detailed on page 17. And you drove her cars, leased vehicles, the payments for which were also made by me, from an account funded exclusively by me." Page 22. Richard slumped back in his chair, defeated. He was a man who understood numbers, and the numbers in that portfolio were irrefutable. He had been outmaneuvered, outplayed, and utterly humiliated by the man he had dismissed as a simpleton. It was Chloe who rallied, a last desperate gasp of her ingrained arrogance. She laughed, a brittle, unconvincing sound. "So you have money, so what? You hid it from me, from your own wife. What kind of man does that?" "A man who married into a family who measures a person's worth by the size of their bank account," Alex replied without hesitation. "I didn't hide it, Chloe. I just didn't advertise it. I wanted you to love me for who I was, not for what I had. I wanted to see if you could. He let that hang in the air for a moment. The experiment, I'm afraid, was a failure. The cruelty of the truth was devastating. Tears welled in Chloe's eyes, tears of frustration and wounded pride. She looked at her father for support, but he was staring blankly at the far wall, lost in his own world of financial ruin and social disgrace. She turned her anger back to the one tangible thing she thought she understood. So what about the other assets? The personal things? What's this line item here? She snatched a page from the portfolio her father was still holding, her finger jabbing at the paper. Personal assets, Schedule C. What's that? Some hidden art collection? More secret stocks? She was sneering now, trying to claw back some semblance of control. Or is it just the junk in your precious garage? Alex met her gaze. A slow, sad smile touched his lips. Yes, Chloe, he said softly. It is. It's the junk in the garage. The garage you so generously left me. He nodded at Marcus again. Marcus opened the second portfolio. This one was thinner. It contained only a few pages, protected in clear plastic sleeves. He didn't get up this time. He simply slid it across the vast, polished expanse of the table. It glided silently, like a ship coming into port, and stopped directly in front of Chloe. Schedule C, Marcus said. Contents of the detached garage at 42 Willow Lane. One item. Chloe stared at the portfolio as if it were a snake. With a trembling hand, she opened it. The first page was a single, stunning, high-resolution photograph. It was the Shelby, shot from a low angle, gleaming under the track lighting of the garage. It looked powerful, mythic, a piece of automotive sculpture. She looked up, confused. It's a car, an old car. What is this? Turn the page, Alex said quietly. She turned the page. It was a copy of the original bill of sale from 1965, from Shelby American to a race team in Texas. The next page was the car's official SCCA racing logbook, detailing every race it had ever entered, every win, every podium finish. The next was a letter of authentication from the Shelby American Automobile Club. And the final page, the one that mattered, was a current, notarized appraisal from a world-renowned classic car auction house. Chloe stared at it. Her eyes scanned the text, but her brain refused to process the information. She saw the name 1965 Shelby GT350R and the chassis number SFM5R531. And then she saw the number at the bottom of the page, the appraised value, $3,900,000. The paper slipped from her fingers. It fluttered to the table, landing face up. Richard leaned over, his eyes wide, and read the number. A guttural, choking sound escaped his throat. $3.9 million, Chloe whispered, the words like foreign sounds in her mouth. For a car? Not just a car, Chloe, Alex said, his voice imbued with the reverence he felt for the machine. That is one of the most significant American competition cars ever built. It is automotive history. It's a legend. It's art, engineering, and raw, unapologetic power all rolled into one. It's everything your world pretends to be, but it's real. He leaned back in his chair. The revelation was complete. The quiet bomb had detonated, and the fallout was settling in a thick, choking dust of shattered arrogance. The room was a vacuum, all the air sucked out by the sheer, crushing weight of that one single asset. An asset they had dismissed as junk. An asset they had willingly, mockingly left behind. The car, like the majority of my financial portfolio, is a premarital asset, Marcus stated, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. The title, the restoration invoices, the appraisal, it's all exclusively in Mr. Mason's name. It is not, and has never been, a marital asset. It is not subject to division. He paused, letting the legal finality sink in. Legally, it's no different than if he had owned a Picasso. Chloe stared at Alex, her face a maelstrom of emotions. Disbelief, fury, regret, and something new, a horrifying, dawning respect that was more painful than any hatred. She had traded a king for a pair of jesters and a house of cards. "You played me," she breathed, the accusation thin and weak. "No, Chloe," Alex said, and for the first time there was a note of genuine sadness in his voice. "I gave you every chance to play for the same team. You just didn't like the uniform." He and Marcus stood up in unison. The meeting was over. "Our counter-offer will be delivered to your office by the end of the day, Mr. Vance," Marcus said to the shell-shocked lawyer. "It will detail what Mr. Mason is willing to provide in the interest of a swift and silent dissolution of the marriage. I assure you it will be substantially less generous than your initial proposal, but I suspect you will now be in a position to accept it." They turned to leave. "Alex, wait!" Chloe cried out, the sound raw and desperate. It was the cry of someone watching her entire future drive away in a vintage racing car. Alex paused at the door, his hand on the handle, but he did not turn around. "What do you want, Chloe?" he asked the door. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked, her voice cracking. Alex was silent for a long moment. He thought of all the insults, all the condescension, all the times he had been made to feel small. He could have been cruel. He could have been vindictive. But that wasn't his nature. That was theirs. "I don't know," he said, his voice soft but final. "For the first time in your life, I suppose you'll have to figure that out for yourself." And with that, he walked out of the room, leaving the ruins of the Lockwood Empire behind him. The satisfying click of the heavy door closing behind him was the sweetest sound he had ever heard. The days that followed were a symphony of predictable chaos, which Alex observed from a calm, detached distance. The first movement was the frantic barrage of voicemails. Chloe's came first, a series of messages that cycled through the 5 stages of grief in record time. Denial. "This is a joke. It has to be a joke." Anger. "You will not get away with this. My father will sue you into oblivion." Bargaining. "Alex, please, we can fix this. Just call me." Depression. "I can't believe you did this to me." And finally, a pathetic, hollow acceptance. "Call me. We need to talk." Then came Richard's single, blustering message, full of impotent threats about audits and legal challenges, which Marcus dismissed with a single, 3-sentence letter to Arthur Vance that mentioned the words malicious prosecution and sanctions. A deep silence followed from the Lockwood patriarch. The most surprising calls were from Julian. He left 3 messages. The first was a confused inquiry, wondering if the sentient house thing was a go now that Alex was rolling in it. The second was an angry rant about family loyalty. The third was a desperate, wheezing plea for a loan, any loan, because his latest round of investors had pulled out after hearing some crazy rumors about the Lockwood family's finances. Alex deleted them all. The legal fallout was swift and brutal. Arthur Vance, faced with the unassailable mountain of evidence Marcus had provided, advised Chloe and Richard to accept Alex's counteroffer immediately and without contest. The offer was surgically precise. Chloe would be allowed to keep her personal effects, the clothes, the jewelry, and one of the leased cars, provided she assumed the payments herself. The joint bank account was to be closed, with the remaining balance, a paltry few $1,000s, split between them. She would have to vacate the house within 30 days. There would be no alimony. The settlement included a strict, non-disclosure agreement, preventing her or her family from ever speaking publicly about the marriage or the divorce. It was a gag order, designed to protect Alex's privacy, but it also had the convenient effect of preventing the Lockwoods from spinning the story to their social circle. Chloe signed. What choice did she have? To fight would be to have Alex's true financials entered into public record, a humiliation Richard Lockwood could not afford. Their entire house of cards was built on the perception of wealth and power. The revelation that the quiet architect they'd all mocked was an order of magnitude wealthier than they were would have shattered that perception forever. They chose silence and defeat over public disgrace. 1 month later, Alex stood in the now empty living room of the house. It was a beautiful late summer afternoon, and golden light streamed through the large windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. The echoes were gone, the clicking heels, the brittle laughter, the ghosts of old arguments. All of it had been exorcised. It was just a house again, a well-built structure of wood, glass, and stone. His house. His phone rang. It was Marcus. "It's done," Marcus said. "The title transfer on the house is complete. The last of the paperwork was just filed with the court. You are officially a free man." "Thank you, Marcus," Alex said, a weight he hadn't even realized he was carrying lifting from his shoulders. "For everything." "That's what friends are for," Marcus replied warmly. "Besides, my fee for unwinding your life was less than a rounding error on your portfolio's performance this quarter. So, what's the first thing you're going to do as a free man?" Alex looked around the empty room. "I'm going to get some new furniture." The months that followed were a quiet renaissance. Alex didn't throw his money around or buy a fleet of supercars. That wasn't him. Instead, he invested in himself, in his passions. He hired a small, elite construction crew and began a complete renovation of the garage. The rotting wood was replaced with reclaimed cypress. The leaky roof was swapped for a modern, insulated system with skylights. The sagging doors were replaced with a single, silent, custom-built rolling door of frosted glass and steel. It was no longer a garage. It was a studio, a clean, well-lit space worthy of the masterpiece it housed. He threw himself back into his work with a renewed sense of purpose. His firm took on a groundbreaking project to design a sustainable, low-income housing community, a project Richard Lockwood would have dismissed as charity, but that Alex saw as legacy. He saw Chloe one last time, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized. He was at a small, independent coffee shop in a neighborhood far from his own, reviewing some blueprints. He looked up and saw her standing in line. She looked diminished. The designer clothes were still there, but they seemed to hang on her differently, without the same effortless confidence. Her hair wasn't as perfectly coiffed. Her face, without the armor of makeup and arrogance, looked tired and surprisingly young. She was driving a modest Honda, he noticed through the window. The Porsche was gone. He later heard through the grapevine of gossip that her father's fund had suffered massive capital flight after whispers of his financial troubles began to circulate. Julian's sentient home venture had collapsed in a spectacular blaze of debt and lawsuits, taking a significant chunk of what was left of the family money with it. The Lockwoods were not destitute, but they had fallen, hard and fast, from the social and financial stratosphere. They were merely wealthy now, no longer rich. Chloe saw him. Their eyes met across the crowded cafe. For a moment, he saw a flicker of the old anger, the old pride. But it was quickly replaced by something else, a deep, weary resignation. She gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, a silent acknowledgement of his victory and her defeat. Then she turned and left the cafe without ordering, climbing into her sensible car and driving away. Alex watched her go, and for the first time he felt a pang of something that wasn't anger or satisfaction, but a quiet, detached pity. A year to the day after Chloe had driven away in the Porsche, leaving him with the wrecked garage, Alex stood in the doorway of his new studio. The late afternoon sun streamed through the open glass door, glinting off the perfect, immaculate curves of the Shelby. The space around it was clean, organized, and beautiful. On one wall, a massive screen displayed the complex architectural plans for the housing community project. On a workbench, new tools were laid out in perfect order. Marcus was there, leaning against the fender of the Shelby, a glass of bourbon in his hand. Alex held a matching glass. "To unwrecked garages," Marcus said, raising his glass. And to true value, Alex replied, clinking his glass against his friend's. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, admiring the car. It was more than just a collection of metal, leather, and rubber. It was a symbol of integrity, of authenticity, of a value that couldn't be faked or bought on credit. It was a reminder that the most powerful things in life are often the ones that are quiet, unassuming, and underestimated. Alex had never wanted revenge. He had only wanted justice. And in the end, he had gotten it. Not by stooping to their level, not by becoming cruel or vindictive, but by simply being himself, quietly and patiently, until the time came to reveal the truth. The Lockwoods hadn't been destroyed by him. They had been destroyed by their own greed and blindness, by their inability to see worth in anything that didn't glitter. He had learned a valuable lesson. True worth is not in what you own, but in who you are. It's in the work you do, the passion you follow, the integrity you maintain. It's a quiet strength, built over time, piece by piece, like a classic car being restored to its former glory. And when you have that, you have everything. It's a powerful thing to be underestimated. It gives you a freedom that the overtly powerful never get to experience. It allows you to build your world in secret, to your own specifications, until you're ready to reveal it. So we have to ask, have you ever had to prove your worth to someone who refused to see it? What's the Shelby in the garage that you hold as your own secret strength? Let us know your story in the comments below. Your journey might just be the inspiration someone else needs to hear. And if you found this story of quiet vindication satisfying, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of justice and redemption.